Good morning. 30 years ago, Danny Bates was a student at Covenant College. He was working under his car, getting ready for a date. As he worked under the car, the jack that was holding the car up broke, and he was killed instantly by the weight of the car. Today, 30 years later, we celebrate the way that the Lord loved and ministered to the Bates family through the Covenant College community in a time of unspeakable tragedy and sorrow. The Lord promises to be our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in trouble, and he puts hands and feet to that promise as his Spirit works through his people, through his church, and through places like Covenant College. After Danny was killed, the Bates family wanted to say thank you to the Covenant College community and to remind people that in tragedy, God still speaks and loves and cares and is ultimately glorified. So today we celebrate 20 years of the Spirit of Friendship Award and Scholarship, presented to a student who demonstrates Christ-like love to the Covenant College community. After our speaker, John Bates, Danny's brother, will come and present this year's award. John's a 1988 Covenant College graduate, and his wife Donna graduated in 1989. John served in the Covenant College Development Office for 10 years, has served the last 4 years with To Every Tribe Ministry, and is currently the founder of Bulwark Ventures. To the entire Bates family that's here, to Dan and Sarah, to John and Donna, to Logan, to Sarah, thank you and welcome. It is now my privilege to introduce our speaker for this morning, Dr. President Frank Brock. Yeah, we can woo. Dr. Brock served as the president of Covenant College from 1987 until 2002, and as the president of the Covenant College Foundation until retiring in 2010. In a brief introduction, it is impossible to encapsulate the impact that Dr. Brock has had on Covenant College or to provide a sufficient snapshot of his life. Dr. Brock is a churchman, a businessman, a community leader, an educator, an author, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather. He is a lover of Jesus Christ and a lover and faithful servant of this place that God has called him to serve for so many years. Dr. Brock is a graduate of the Macaulay School in Chattanooga, University of North Carolina, the Harvard Business School. He received honorary doctorates from Geneva College and Lee University. Frank and his wife Dottie have been married since 1965, have 3 children, Crew, Peg, and Marshall, all of whom attended Covenant College and married former Covenant College students. Frank and Dottie have, I think this is right, 21 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild? 2 great-grandchildren. There it is. They've been busy since this was written. We are truly grateful and privileged to have him here with us this morning. Please welcome Dr. Frank Brock.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be back, wonderful to be with you. It's a great honor. Thanks to John and Donna for inviting me to speak. It's not actually my favorite thing to do, but I couldn't be more honored to be asked. And it was a very, very poignant moment for me and for the whole community. When you become president of college, it's not something you think you'll ever have to do, to have a student die in the prime of their life, and someone I didn't know him well, but I knew him. And I'll never forget that day, and the day his parents came up, and Danny's parents came up, and we were just overwhelmed by the way this community handled it. I went to the University of North Carolina, and it was totally outside of any experience I could have imagined as a college student to see how this community rallied around that family. John asked me to speak just briefly about something that maybe had kind of been a central organizing thought for my life at this point. And so I'm going to try to do that. I think it really is in keeping with this idea of walking the talk that we say we follow Jesus, and clearly this award is intended to recognize someone who does that. So I'm going to start with a little story. When I was in business, I had to take the longest trip of my entire life. I was supposed to go to Australia to buy some machinery, or to actually inspect some machinery that we'd already bought. And never been on the other side of the world before. To fly to Australia, you had to go to Holland, fly out of Schiphol in Holland, and then I was going to be on a 15-hour flight from there to Bangkok, and from Bangkok to Australia. It's a 24-hour trip, basically, to get there. And I was a relatively new Christian, and I had thought a good bit about the flight, and I would pray that I would be next to someone that would be meaningful time to spend 15 hours with on that plane. So when I came into my seat, the seat beside me was empty, and in a few minutes some dark-skinned gentleman came and obviously wanted to sit in that seat, and I didn't know if he spoke English or not, so I said, hello, how are you? And he spoke English. He said, fine. And I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to the Philippines. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Australia. We were actually going first to Thailand. And so I said, where are you coming from? He said, I'm coming from Liberia. And I said, what were you doing there? And he said, oh, I've been there for 8 years as a missionary. And I said, really? So you're a believer? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I am too. And he said, well, anybody can be a believer. Are you a follower? And that was one of the most remarkable 15 hours of my life, as I sat next to this man who spent a lot of the time crying as he was leaving the place where he loved to go to teach in this Catholic seminary. You should know that. A Catholic seminary in the Philippines, where his order had called him back. Now, I tell you that story because as I sort of look back on life and look at what the press says and what sort of the perception is of Christians, the general perception seems to be that Jesus is the founder of the Christian religion. And my question for you is a very simple one. Are you a Christian, or are you a disciple? Are you a Christian, or are you a disciple? He might have said, are you a believer, or are you a follower? I'm changing it a little bit to say, are you a Christian, or are you a disciple? Now, I'll let you define what it means to be a Christian. It seems to me to be a term that has such broad definition as to really defy any explanation. But when you think about what Jesus came to do, it seems to me that one of the very first things he did, certainly the thing that we wouldn't know he was alive if he had not done this. We would not know he lived or died in a way if he had not done this. He began to call 12 people to be his disciples and to follow him. And that meant a lot of things. And I'm going to just take a few verses to try to illustrate what I think are some of the key points. And all these verses really have, the context is, Jesus said to his disciples. That's the context of all of these verses. And so the first question really that I would ask is, what was it after he called the disciples? What was the first thing that Jesus seems to have said to his disciples? And it was said to them in response to a question that they had. The question was this, and I'm going to do the amplified version here. Will you please teach us to pray? They saw something in this man, and they saw that there was something in his prayer life that made him different. And they saw that when he was harassed and when he was overwhelmed and tired, he didn't just keep doing more, he withdrew and prayed. And they said, teach us to pray. So one of the first characteristics of a disciple is someone who knows they don't have within them the ability to confront the situations they face. They want to know how to pray. Now, I'm going to do something. I'm not really into this kind of thing, but I'm going to do this because I think it's pretty important to the point I'm trying to make, and I'm going to come down here because I think it's really important to realize that Jesus didn't stand up there. Now, they told me this might happen, so we'll see. It's not a word from the Lord. So Jesus didn't stand up there. He was down here. He was just walking around like me. He didn't even have, I tried to get out of wearing a coat and tie. My wife said, you got to wear a coat and tie. But he didn't have on a coat and tie. So imagine without a coat and tie. And he sat down, I'm sure, a lot. He was, they say he stood up, but I'm going to just sit right here. And I'm going to say, okay. They came to him and they said, teach us to pray. And then, what was sort of one of the other things that happened? Well, he quoted the Bible a lot. He quoted the Old Testament a lot. And finally, he said to his disciples, again, the key word is here, that if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples. He said that it was, you search the scriptures because you believe in them you have eternal life, but it is they that bear witness to me. So when you get into trouble, and one of the things that Jesus said that I can promise you, whether you're a believer or not, Christian or not, Buddhist, Muslim, whatever, Jesus said this, and it's true, you better mark it down. In this world, you're going to have many troubles. Jesus said that. And he said, if you continue in my word, then you're truly my disciples. So one of the characteristics of people that were disciples is they wanted to know how to pray. And he said you need to know how to stay in the word. And then he said another very curious thing. He said, I'm going to give you a new commandment. I need to give you this new thought. Now, it wasn't really new. He said, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Now, that was as old as Moses. Moses had said that. And Jesus had said that was the great, the part of the great commandment. Why did he say that they need to love one another? Well, in my life, perhaps the single most important thing to me has been a few people who I've walked with. It was crucial to the disciples. And here's just a basic, simple thought. You can't love the world, you can't love others until you love somebody. And loving somebody is hard. All of those who have sort of come from home and moved into a hall and tried to live with a roommate, you're getting a taste of that. It's going to be even harder when you're out of this environment and you're in a job and pressures of earning money and all kinds of pressures. You're going to have a hard time finding a few people who will really be able to love you and whom you can love. Sort of a real relationship, genuine relationship based on genuine commitments of transparency and caring and forgiveness. That's hard. And so this commandment to love one another was basically new because everybody knew how to be religious. And I don't really see in the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the other religious leaders that they knew how to love each other. And Jesus said, I've got to show you. And so just walking those dusty roads, just being with Jesus and being together was like a new commandment. And Jesus also said that if you're like me and my relationship with the Father, then the world will see that you're one, and then people will believe. There is no chance in this world that you're going to get denominations to agree on things. But you can be united with a few other people, and you can be disciples, and you can be able to show the world, and they will believe because they see how you love one another. That's the way it was. It's so simple. Everything Jesus said is so simple. And then what happens? Well, one of the things that happens is you begin to bear fruit. Now we think of the fruit of the Spirit, but it could also be just the fruit of the labor of your work, or it could be the fruit, and this is an important thought, it could be the fruit of being a disciple. And what happens when you're a disciple? It's like swimming. On the backstroke, you make disciples. If you're following Jesus and a few people are following Jesus, then all of a sudden, on the backstroke, other people want to follow Jesus, and people begin to follow Jesus, and you begin to bear the fruit of discipling. You begin to bear the fruit of caring. You begin to bear, perhaps it's in your family. Jesus also said that, you've got to be willing to forsake it all. You've got to be willing to leave your father and your mother, your brothers and your children. Some of you have had to do that. Some of you come from non-believing families. And some of you have found that this family, this new family, is really more important. Some of you had to forsake all you had. All of those disciples had to be willing to do that. That doesn't mean that you can never earn money. If it weren't for people earning money, this chapel wouldn't be here. This school wouldn't be here. We want people who can make money. It may be the fruit of your labors. It could be abundant fruit, fruit that is beyond any comprehension. You could become billionaires. And yet you begin to use that money to extend God's kingdom in eternally profitable ways. But there was this sense in which if you begin to love one another, that you're one mind and one spirit, as Paul said, and that you begin to bear this fruit of disciples, and then you begin to have children perhaps, there's just no telling what the fruit may look like, the fruit of your labor or the fruit of the Spirit. But it's what disciples do. They just naturally produce fruit. It just happens. It's, like the vine. And all of a sudden you've got this vine, and all of a sudden this fruit starts growing. You don't hear the vine go, I've got to grunt and groan to grow this fruit. It just happens. So that's what it means to be a disciple. And honestly, the thing that is kind of frustrating is that if you ask someone, are you a disciple? You might hear something like, I try to be. It's almost like we're embarrassed to say, I'm a disciple. Do you really believe that Jesus is risen? Of course you do. Do you believe he's still making disciples? I hope you do. Because I think you have a better chance of knowing what it means to follow Jesus than the disciples did when they were following Jesus. They were so confused. It actually says that right before that verse when Jesus said, in your going, make disciples of all nations. The verse before that says they came to the mountain where Jesus appointed them to go, but some doubted. I mean, this is after he'd been raised for 40 days. And they still doubted. You have far more knowledge, far more chance to be a disciple than they ever did. Because he is risen. And because he's alive. And so you just have to decide, what is it that you are? Are you going to just be a Christian? You set the bar wherever you think the bar should be set. Oh, it means I got to go to church. It means I got to give a little money. It means I got to do this or that. None of that. Jesus didn't say to do any of that. He just said, follow me. Just follow me. And here's the real kicker. The very last thing that he said. You know what those last words were? Who knows what those last words were? Who? Who knows what those last words were? In Acts, what did he say finally? You'll receive power. You'll receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. And then you'll be my witnesses. Judea and Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world. Hey guys, listen. It's never been easier. You can stand right here. How many countries in this room? Maybe 20? Right here in this room. You can stand in one spot and the world's going to read the path right past your door. Never been easier to be a witness in Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. You'll have the power that Jesus promised, the power of the Holy Spirit. Not to just some people, every one of his followers gets that power. That's what it means to be a disciple. Very simple. Are you a believer? Are you a Christian? Did Jesus really come to establish the Christian religion? I don't think so. I think he called people to be his disciples. And I hope that all of you will take that thought and just meditate on it. Just like this plane trip was close to 30 years ago for me. I mean, a long, long time ago. It's been just working in my mind over the years. Am I a Christian? So what? Everybody's a Christian, especially in this country. Are you a disciple? Thanks, John, for asking me to speak.